This story takes place during the height of the pandemic in 2020. I had always been a little overweight and lazy, and since there was no one out on the roads, I decided to take up walking. My neighborhood wraps around itself. By the time you made it all the way around, you would have walked an entire mile. The only people I ever saw were this nice couple that walked around the same time that I did. We would always stop and have these nice little chats from time to time. I would even look forward to my walks just to talk to these people. But one day, they vanished. I would never see them out and about. The grass outside of their home became overgrown, and it seemed like parts of their house were damaged from neglect. After a while, curiosity got the best of me, and I would knock on the door whenever I would pass by their house, but I would never get an answer. Now, on the day in question, I had been busy and missed my daily walk, so I decided to take my walk during the night. I grabbed a flashlight and went on my way. I eventually passed by the house. I then noticed that the front door was open. Being the curious person I was, I walked down the driveway and yelled into the house. Hello? Is there anyone here?" All was quiet. But as I stood there, I heard a creak to my right. I peeked inside with my flashlight, and then my light fell upon a tall, rough-looking man just standing there, grinning at me. I was startled when I saw him. He then lunged towards me and began to chase me. As I mentioned earlier, I was overweight, so I couldn't run very fast. He would have caught up to me if it wasn't for a car passing by. The man ran back inside, and I managed to get away and call the police. When they arrived, they found the man in the same spot he was when I first saw him. It wouldn't be till a while later before all the details came out. The man who chased me that night confessed to brutally murdering the couple who lived at the house and burying their bodies in the backyard. He also admitted to torturing them before ending their lives. The night that I walked into the house, he was in the middle of making sure the bodies were not uncovered by the heavy rain. The house was bulldozed after they dug up the bodies and were given a proper burial. The scumbag tried to plead insanity, but the court ruled that out, giving him 2 life sentences without parole. I sometimes still walk past where the couple once lived, and every time I do, I think about how those 2 sweet, innocent people were taken out of this world by an absolute monster. About a month ago, my friends and I got some tickets to a professional hockey game in Minneapolis. The game was about a 5-hour drive from where we lived, so we decided to make a weekend trip out of it. On that Friday afternoon, I was picked up by my friend Kevin. We then drove to pick up my other friend Dan and hit the road. We weren't heading for a motel, but instead to the house of our mutual friend, Jack. Jack lived in North Minneapolis, and he offered to let us stay at his house for the weekend. We had all grown up together and were really good friends with him, and he also had a ticket to the hockey game as well, so things were lining up. We arrived at Jack's house early in the morning, and Kevin parked the car out front. He then texted Jack to let him know that we were there. We all got out and walked over to the trunk to grab our bags. It was about this time that we heard tires screeching. We then turned to look at the intersection directly behind us. A green compact car had apparently cut off a dark-colored SUV as the driver was proceeding through the intersection. Both vehicles came to a stop, and the 2 male drivers had rolled down their windows and began yelling at each other. Not wanting to get involved, I quickly grabbed my bag and walked up the path towards Jack's house, with Dan close behind me. Jack lived in a sort of retrofitted duplex, where he rented out the ground floor and someone else lived on the second. Jack had moved to the city fairly recently, and we had never visited him until now, so when we entered the walk-in porch, Dan and I weren't sure which door was his. As we stood there, I pulled out my phone to call Jack and asked him to let us in. Meanwhile, Kevin was still in the back of his car rearranging some bags and trying to fix a panel that had popped off during the drive. The two drivers were still yelling at each other, and at this point, they had both exited their vehicles. I didn't have a great view of the situation from the porch, but I could still hear them yelling at each other. To make matters worse, Jack's house was right on the corner, so we were only about 20 yards away from where this was going down. It was way too close for comfort. All of a sudden, we heard a loud pop. Dan and I froze, and I saw Kevin stand up from the back of his car and look around. I immediately thought it might have been a gunshot, but I wasn't 100% sure. I turned to Dan, and from the look on his face, I saw that he also thought it was a gunshot. "Oh shit. Okay, let's get the hell inside. Now," Dan said to me nervously. I unfroze and quickly called Jack, who said that he was on his way to open the door. The two cars peeled off, and Kevin joined us on the porch. We all came to the conclusion that a gunshot went off, and that one of the two drivers had fired it during their confrontation. We didn't know who fired the shot or which direction the bullet went. However, Kevin said that he didn't hear any bullets whizzing past him. Jack led us into the house, commenting that he heard a shot go off too, and swearing that nothing like that had ever happened since he moved in. We talked about it for a bit, but no one was hurt, and the drivers were gone now, so we shook it off. Aside from that, we had a great weekend of eating, exploring, and getting drunk at a nail-biter of a hockey game. It was loads of fun, and Jack offered to drive us everywhere since he knew the area. When we were ready to head home that Sunday afternoon, we piled back into Kevin's car. That's when we realized exactly where the bullet had gone. There was a clean bullet hole through Kevin's rearview mirror and windshield. I have no idea how he had missed it before, but there were shards of glass and scattered bits of plastic across his dashboard. We looked around for an entrance hole in the back of the car, but we couldn't find one. That left only one possibility. The bullet came through the open hatch of Kevin's car while he was hunched down in the back trying to fix the panel. Kevin was no more than a foot away from being hit, based on the bullet's trajectory. Kevin would have been shot in the head or the neck if he had been standing straight up. Here's a photo that shows where the bullet went through the car's mirror and windshield. Once the shock of our discovery wore off, we called the police to get a report for insurance purposes. An officer showed up, and Kevin showed her the bullet hole. At first, she was confused. I think for a second she even suspected that we were messing around and fired a gun inside the car. But when Kevin told her all the details, I saw the officer's jaw drop. Unfortunately, none of us could provide the officer with any truly useful information, like a detailed description of the shooter or a license plate number. Our next issue was finding out how the heck we were going to drive 5 hours with a bullet hole through the windshield. Thankfully, a patch-up job of sealer and duct tape from a local hardware store did the trick. On the drive home, we had a solemn conversation where we spent a few hours of hard thinking about the fragility of human life. Even now, I'm not sure if I've fully processed how close Kevin came to dying. I can't even imagine how he feels about it. As for the guy who thought it was a good idea to fire a gun in the middle of a highly populated neighborhood, I either hope he gets his life in order or ends up in jail. I work nights. I finish my shift around 4:45 a.m. I live in one of the 5 boroughs of New York. My neighborhood is relatively safe, and I've never had any issues until this incident. I was on a service road about a block away from my house. I pulled over to the left side of the street to fix something that had fallen while I was driving. I should have done this when I got home. When I looked into my rearview mirror, I saw a car that was uncomfortably close behind me. It hadn't been there when I first pulled over. I quickly put my car in drive and made a right, and the car followed. So I turned onto my street. I figured that I wouldn't go home right away in case I was being followed. I proceeded down another block at a slow pace, watching my rearview mirror the entire time. The car is still behind me. I made a right at the next stop sign, still driving slowly, and the car behind me does the same. I then made a sudden right turn down another block, increasing my speed. I look into my mirror again to see a pair of headlights. The chase was on. I made so many lefts and rights to get away from this pursuing vehicle, but the driver was stuck to me like glue. I then hit the SOS button on my SUV, which connects me to 911. I proceeded to tell the operator that I was being chased, and that I was running through traffic lights so that the police would figure out my location. The operator confirmed that they were tracking my vehicle, and they knew exactly where I was. At this point, I was going about 80 on a 35. I turn into the left lane, and the tailgater ends up right next to me in the opposite lane. I then made a daring move. I slammed on my brakes so the car could get ahead of me. I then get behind them. I could only imagine this enraged the tailgater, because a second later, they slammed on their brakes, and I almost rear-ended them, but thanks to my lightning-fast reflexes, I managed to avoid that, and my car came to a sudden stop. I screamed into the phone, reading out the license plate number, and then decided to drive to the police station, which was a few blocks down from us. I did not stop at any of the traffic lights as I flew down the road. The car continued to follow me all the way to the precinct. During all of this, I was still talking to the operator, who was relaying the information to the police. I was blaring on my horn as I pulled up, and the cops came running outside to me. The tailgater then made a U-turn and vanished into the night. After giving my statement to the police, they had a squad car follow me back home. They also patrolled the area for the rest of the night. I'm pretty sure the police know who it is, but unfortunately they haven't tracked him down yet. During the chase, there was a photo taken by a traffic cam when I ran a red light. You can see my SUV in the intersection, being followed by the car. This was the first time I was ever truly scared for my life. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into this episode of Based on True Events. If you enjoyed these narrations and would like your story to be featured in this series, please send in your written experience to unit522stories@outlook.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, I'm your Uncle Unit, and as always, never forget, there's always a